All right. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. And today I welcome an old friend of mine, Will Spencer, and just share a little bit of his, official bio here. Will Spencer is an entrepreneur, traveler, and storyteller. His path has taken him from Stanford University to the dot-com boom, the warehouse rave scene of San Francisco, and through 33 countries on 6 continents. Along the way, his passion for personal growth led him through the traumatic loss of his mother and into the exciting world of man's personal development and transformation. Now he helps men become exceptional versions of themselves through discipline and self-knowledge. Welcome to the podcast, Will.
Thanks so much, Bernhard. It's great to see you.
Beautiful. Likewise. And also to mention, you have your own really amazing podcast going on called The Renaissance of Man. And that's really what I want to dive into, the Renaissance of Man. The first time when I actually heard what you're doing, like the title was very intriguing. I have to say this right on. So because there's something about that needs to happen in this day and age with man, the Renaissance of Man. So that's beautiful. But before we dive into it, I just wanted the listeners know that we've known each other for almost 8 years, 7 years, I don't remember. Like we first on Facebook or something, we met, even joined a workshop with embodiment workshop with Philip Shepard, who I've had on the podcast, right? You remember there? You came down here back when I was in LA. And then you joined the first retreat I hosted with our good friend Fred Alvarez, Time of Transition retreat in Peru in 2016. And I believe that year that set you off on the world journey, right? When you really took a backpack and started traveling for how long? Until just recently, right? For 33 years.
I traveled for 4 years. So I left in March of 2016, March 21st, 2016. I moved into a new apartment in Phoenix on March 21st, 2020. So the day the lockdowns hit.
Wow.
4 years pretty much to the day, which is pretty wild.
Exactly. So share a little bit about yourself. How did you come through this journey, through your own experiences, what we just shared? I'm sure you've gone through a lot with the loss of your mother. Remember that, and your own personal, especially when you travel like that, backpacking through 33 countries, you learn a lot about yourself. That would be an understatement, right? To the place where you are right now. Can you just kind of, encapsulate your main insights and experiences through this journey?
Yeah, I can. But before I do, I just want to say how great it is to be doing this with you, because we've been on such a great journey together. And I remember, we met for the first time at the Philip Shepard workshop. And of course, just chatting so many times on Facebook. And then to be there with you for your first time of transition retreat was a really special experience. And that's actually partially why I started my trip in South America, because I had a choice of starting either in Africa or South America. And then you announce your time of transition retreat. It's like, oh, I got to go to Bernhard's thing. I got to do that.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
It's really great to feel the different phases of life we've both moved through and the things we've shared. And so to be here hosting podcasts now,
I know.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. No, I have to also say on the side note, you're an amazing DJ. Remember, you're still we had the last night in the middle of the jungle. We had a whole DJ setup, and you had the party, and it was the best jungle party I've ever experienced. It was awesome. So just on a random side note.
Oh, that was so much fun. That was actually one of the best DJ sets I've ever played. And to prove the point that art thrives under constraint. So normally I'm used to having like CD decks and everything. All I had was my laptop and one channel. So whatever's playing is through my headphones is what you're hearing. So I just had to pick tracks and just kind of go with it in the moment. Right. And so just flowing with it was like, this is really working. And I think you have the photo, but I'll send it to you again. It was a really special experience for me too, to have to be totally in the moment with you guys and for you guys. So that's definitely one of my top 3 or top 5 DJ sets of all time.
Yeah, it was awesome. Awesome, man. Yeah. So tell us a little bit, but I'm really curious myself because that's really an undertaking to backpack the world for 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I didn't intend to. I thought I'd maybe travel for 9 months, and we'll get into my story about how I got there shortly, I'm sure. But the first thing that I can ever say that I authentically wanted for myself was to travel. I remember it was Y2K, year 2000. My sister took me to a rave, and I was working I was a tech founder, a startup tech founder, a .com. era at the time. And my sister took me to a rave for New Year's Eve in Phoenix, and fed me a little something on my tongue. And next thing I knew, I was dancing all night, like listening to DJ music that I'd never heard before. And I woke up in the morning, and the next day, we went home, obviously. I woke up the next day and I said, I have to be a DJ. And what I really wanted from that experience, I didn't recognize it at the time, but I had all these desires inside my head that I had projected onto DJing. So I mistook the subject, which was me, for the object, which was a DJ. But that was enough to begin getting me moving along my path to self-discovery. And one of the big aspects that I wanted from DJing was to travel. I wanted to see the world, right? I mistook the vehicle to get me there as playing music, but ultimately that was something that I wanted. And to have something to offer when I traveled the world. It was about, I don't just want to travel the world as a tourist passively consuming. There are plenty of people who do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I just need to emphasize that as a traveler, there's a lot of hatred that's projected towards tourists. But look, these are people that otherwise wouldn't get out of their homes, that are taking what they perceive as a risk to go into the world. And so I always celebrate tourists, like, thank you for coming out of your home and seeing the world. So that aside, I wanted to have something to offer. And so it took me 16 years to allow that organic desire to blossom and develop, and to separate it from the dream of DJing and be like, oh, I don't actually need this thing at all. I just have this dream to travel. And so I sold everything. This was in March 2016. I sold everything. I just had some boxes that I put in storage, really. Sold my car, all my furniture, kept my DJ records, of course, and set off on this adventure. And I thought I'd be gone for maybe 9 months. And that's, and then 9 months became a year, and then a year became, okay, maybe 2 years. And then it became like, okay, I'm going to travel until I make it around the world, until I run out of money, or until I get a message from God to stop. Then I got a message from God to stop after spending 6 months in India and Nepal. I had run out of gas at that point. So that's when I moved to New Zealand. I thought that there's a woman there who I loved very much, who I thought we were going to spend our lives together. That didn't work out, unfortunately. And then I had to slowly extract myself from that situation. I moved back to the States in February of 2020. And then the whole COVID thing happened. And I moved into my apartment the day the lockdowns hit. I had a mattress and a box spring, just me alone in an apartment in a new city. I'm like, okay, well, I guess it's the time for the next adventure. And that's where the Renaissance of Men came from.
Yeah. Beautiful. It's so interesting. There's this divine timing we talked about before. There's all this traveling, and you just came back. Even what happened didn't happen out, or work didn't work out for whatever reason in New Zealand. And you just came back just in time, to put here, with all this craziness. And it almost seemed like, this is always fascinating to talk about. I always like to explore. I'm always big about purpose, what we're here to do. And like you mentioned beautifully, and I can relate to that as well at the beginning when you mentioned about the DJing thing. You're like, oh, this is what I want to do. I'm going to be a DJ. This is my purpose. But then it was actually more the vehicle for something else, right? And I can relate to that as well. Like when I came here from Germany, I want to be a drummer, play music and do the rock star thing, and they realized, the music, the playing drums helped me to be creative, explore myself, especially through music, as it's such a profound effect emotionally, psychologically. It's almost shamanic process, drumming and all of that. And that, similar to you, set off my quest for self-exploration, and the saying applies, tell God your plans will laugh at you. So we never know in the moment why we do these things we do. We think we have a certain intention, but there's some other weird guidance or some other, once we truly also open the path, go into the adventure, answer the call, then doors are open when they haven't been doors before. And it really puts us on this path, when we look back, like, how did I end up here? I never, quote unquote, planned it, but here I am. And this is actually what I really want to do. Right. And I can see this happen to you, because when we were out of touch for some time, and then I realized you do have this new project going on, the Renaissance of Man, and you do your own podcast. I'm like, whoa. And I looked more into it. This is really very important topic also as well, what, this world needs in this day and age, and especially a lot of men, Yeah. So share a little bit about, how did you get to start the Renaissance of Man? What is it and why? I mean, this is a big topic, obviously, in itself, but what did you lead? What was the call for you to do that?
Well, it's there's the lead up to the starting of the project, which is my own personal journey, and then which would, leading up to 2020 and my own personal journeys as a man. And then there's also the starting of the project in 2020. These are kind of two different phases. So I'll start with the easier topic, which is where did the project actually come from? And then we'll back up into how did I come to be doing it? So when I moved back to the United States, I had just spent 4 years traveling. I had climbed mountains, sailed oceans, trekked across deserts. I had essentially, I had scuba dived and mountain climbing courses. I mean, I had done everything adventurous that I could, including ayahuasca ceremonies in Peru at the Temple of the Way of Light, which I highly recommend. I'd explored the New Age world. I'd been to the Kumbh Mela Hindu festival, which is like hundreds of millions of Hindus for 2 months. And I bathed in the Ganges River, not the part at Varanasi, which is an incredible city, but the part upstream. So it's still clean at that portion of the river. I've been a 10-day Vipassana, Goenka Vipassana Buddhist meditation retreat. Like I had done all the things. Like I had been as close to Indiana Jones as I possibly could without that being my intention, right? I would be on the road and an opportunity would present itself like, okay, I'll go do that thing. Right. So then I came back to the United States. I went through this experience with New Zealand with my girlfriend, and she had 4 daughters who I loved and still love very deeply. But we were on different life paths, and so I had to extract myself from that situation very, very gently, so as not to cause any unnecessary damage to them. Just to be as careful and as methodical leaving that situation, as loving as I possibly could, and that took a long time. And so when I moved back to the States finally made it, I'd put on a significant bit of weight. And so here I am alone in my apartment in Phoenix. Lockdowns had started. Gyms are closed. Like I remember when the COVID thing started happening, I would go to like a 24-hour fitness. And I remember watching people starting to wear masks to the gym. And, I was like, oh, what are you doing? Yeah. You're at the gym. Anyway, that's a whole separate topic. But then the gyms finally closed. In fact, I was even staying with my dad at one point, and he lived in an apartment complex, and the gym at his apartment complex even closed. Like the thing was the size of like a small 1-bedroom apartment. It's just like some exercise bikes and some free weights. And they even closed that. So it's like, okay, I'm not going to go out and work out anywhere. And here I am alone in a new city, essentially grieving. What am I going to do? And am I going to sink or swim? And I was like, well, I've always wanted to sort out my weight and get in shape. And there's never going to be a better time than right now. I have total control over my time. I have total control over my space because my apartment's essentially empty. I have total control over my diet. I don't have any friends to go hang out with. No, there's no reason for me to be drinking on the weekends or going to restaurants. Like I can control what I eat. There's never going to be a better time than right now. So I set out on that journey, and I did a program called 75 Hard, which is a 75-day program where you do a set of 6 things. You do 2 workouts a day, one of which of 45 minutes, and one of which has to be outdoors. So you can do one workout in the morning, yoga, weights, whatever, but your second workout, whatever it is, has to be outside. So I would go for walks in the evening. You have to follow some sort of diet or meal plan, drink a gallon of water, take a photo in the mirror every day, read 10 pages of a nonfiction print book. And there's one more, but anyway, you can look up 75 Hard. So I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I started doing that program. And again, following the notion of divine timing, what was so incredible about that experience was that while everyone else is freaking out and the world is melting down, like at that point, people were still uncertain what's going to happen. I had put these structures in place to create a system of control around my life, and that held me together. It's like whatever else is going on, I can do this, and I can control what I'm eating, and I can move my body. And so when I had nothing else, like my dad lives in Phoenix, you know what I mean? But he's in his 70s and we didn't hang out so much. I love my dad, by the way. But it was at that point, it's like, maybe we should all, I didn't buy it from the start, but that's a whole other separate thing. But I could control myself in that way. And that may have actually like really saved my life. And when I say that, like, it would have been, and there was a moment where I was tempted, where I was like, it would be very easy for me to order a PlayStation and get pizza and drink beer and just grieve, and start sliding further down the hill. Yeah. And instead I said, no, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to do 75 Hard instead. And I completed 75 Hard. I built up a ton of momentum. And then in 6 months, I had lost 40 pounds and I'd gotten in the best shape of my life just alone in my apartment without needing a gym. I would do yoga. I would go do sprints in a nearby field sometimes. I had a TRX straps. I didn't even have weights. And it was just about diet and exercise. And at that point, at the end of that journey, during that time, I had become part of several online men's communities. And I found myself expressing myself very openly about the world that I'd experienced and the journey that I'd been on. Having seen the world and having done so much inner self work with ayahuasca and therapy and men's groups and stuff like that, I was really deeply in touch with myself, and I was deeply in touch with the outer world as well. And when I spoke, men listened, which was the first time I'd ever really experienced that. And so I continued talking and found myself becoming a leader in these communities. And then I wrote a blog post called "To Lose the World and Gain My Soul," which was about how angry I was over the whole COVID and Floyd situation, that I had censored myself on social media. I had been very active on Instagram, posting photography, from my travels. And then people started posting black squares on their Instagram. And I didn't want to post something of my travels and have people like, why aren't you posting a black square? So I just disappeared off social media. And I realized I got really pissed off about that, and I got really pissed off that the world had essentially gone into lockdown. And I was like, I want my planet back. I want to be able to get on an airplane and see the world again. I still want to go to the Middle East. I want to go to Russia. I want to go to Mexico. I want to go to Saudi Arabia. I want to go to sub-Saharan Africa and look at this crap. And I said, I'm censoring myself and I have something to say. And so I wrote the blog post, which was essentially, this is what I have to say to everyone and everything. And this is who I am. And this is what I've done. And you cannot tag me with any of the epithets. You cannot tag me with of all the standard tropes. Like, I was born Jewish, right? Like so you can't call me anti-Semitic, right? Good luck with that one, right? And I was, when I was in college at Stanford, I lived in the African American theme dorm for 2 years. So what that means is half of the population of the dorm had to be African American or Black. I was assigned there once my sophomore year at random. I chose to live there again a second year. The CEO of my .com startup was Black. I lived in the fourth most diverse neighborhood in America, Treasure Island, San Francisco, for 12 years. And I was a member of my community. So you can't call me racist. You can't call me a bigot because I've been through 33 countries on 6 continents. That's not something that a quote unquote white supremacist does. Right. They don't do that. Right. And so you can't call me sexist. I was dating this wonderful woman in New Zealand with 4 daughters. I've got loving pictures of us. So I was like, why am I censoring myself? I've done everything I can to live a life of integrity, against, as a genuine, authentic man. And I should be speaking up. So that blog post was me speaking up and said, this is what I believe. This is what I don't believe. This is what I think is happening. And I want my planet back, and I'm not going to be silent anymore. And that post went kind of viral around the world. It got shared by the political commentator Jack Murphy, who has something like 60,000 followers more now on Twitter. I got messages from people who ran nonprofits, and suddenly I realized, oh my God, I've got something to say, and people won't hear it. So I'm going to start speaking. Yeah. And it was out of that I realized that what I had always wanted to do was work one-on-one with men. That I had an experience that, from having been a more sensitive man, that I could speak to that side of masculinity. And I had done all these adventurous, courageous, brave things so I could speak to the tougher side of masculinity as well and help heal those divides that often exist between men. And so I wanted to be a psychotherapist and help do that. I realized that the world doesn't have 3 years for me to get a master's degree in psychotherapy, right? And plus 2 years. So I'll just start being a coach, because I could just start being a coach and start applying my skills right now and work with high functioning people and start bringing men together in that way. And so that's when the Renaissance of Men was born, and it's continued to evolve since then into the podcast and the social media and a bunch of other projects I'm working on.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for sharing. That's amazing. Very inspiring, but shows you in this day and age. And that would say, let me know if you agree with that actually an aspect of the healthy masculine, in a sense, is what you have experienced, to be authentic, to speak up in this day and age right now, because that's what you experience. Because I see a lot of people, what's happening now with COVID, I've been very outspoken, a lot of my wife as well, whereas the split, there's this diversion. Some people go really deep into their just authoritarian followers, in a sense, without questioning, just going along with the program. They still need daddy government, you know what I mean, in a sense, or daddy authority, whatever they tell them, unquestioned. It's not even, they don't have their own opinion. But there are many people also realize they are, quote unquote, waking up to something new or sense something they've maybe never done before because of what's happening in the world, similar to what you experience. Like many people I can see go just along with it in a sense of like you beautifully explained, like with the whole lockdown, some people could just, okay, I'm just going to just eat fast food, watch porn and whatnot, lose all my essence and just submit to whatever until the normal comes back, right? It's very tempting. It's very tempting, obviously, right? And then you get free money and from the government and and you sedate yourself basically. However, as you made the choice, there's a silver lining, right? Have the free time to change. There's a pattern interrupt, right? Okay, I'm going to take charge of my life. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to figure myself out, find a new way, use this as an opportunity, right? Yeah. It ties into like the whole, I don't know if you've heard of the book, becoming anti-fragile, right? Mm-hmm. Using this to become anti-fragile, which you did. And then you find a new purpose, you empowered yourself. And also, what a lot of people are struggling, men and women alike, is just having the courage to speak out, right? Not to go along just because you're afraid of, oh my God, the backlash, the mob, culture out there, the cancel culture and all of that, which essentially don't have, it's almost the illusion of power they have. Because once you step into your power and speak out, there are others like, oh my God, this is like, as you experience, when you become authentic and speak out, maybe there's fear around sharing vulnerability, which is natural. But then people actually respond in a very, very positive way because you voice what other people are afraid to voice. And I can relate to that as well, right? So that's what happens. That's very empowering, right? So when we need to talk about, let's focus on men, because I can see in my journey as well, my own manhood, because most people, men, let's face it, and I can see it with people I've worked with, in myself, we are boys in adult suits, right? In many different ways, or children in adult suits, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you see men are struggling with, or in general, what the men you're working with, or what's the core issues, so to speak?
There's unfortunately a bunch of them, but I think the biggest challenge that I see men working with is that it seems today that there's two kinds of men. So you first, on one side, you have a lot of the very sensitive, soft men. They're very emotionally aware. They may even be very spiritually aware, and very very sensitive to their own needs and to the needs of women. But they lack a certain fire. They lack the ability to declare strong boundaries. Mm-hmm. They maybe don't have the best physiques or take care of their bodies properly. Maybe they need to lose weight, or maybe they need to gain weight, because some men just are naturally quite skinny and can stand to gain some muscle as well. So they're very emotionally switched on, but they lack a certain edge, a certain necessary edge to navigate through the world. So that's one side of men. The other is the side of men that probably have too much edge, that are quite good at navigating through the material world. They're very sharp mentally, perhaps even very sharp physically, but they lack an emotional or spiritual awareness, or emotional or spiritual depth. And the thing is that it would seem, and women, in my experience, this is their experience of men. And this is Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook, actually gave a quote about this in her book, Lean In. And I'm sure we don't need to talk about Sheryl Sandberg, but she said to women, what you're supposed to do in your 20s is you're supposed to date all different kinds of guys, but don't marry them, because then when you become 30, there's a whole different kind of guy that will be necessary, that maybe won't be as exciting, but that'll be a good father and provider. And so in the men's movement, that this terminology shows up, it's sort of unfortunately labeled laden with a sense of value judgment, and I want to strip that away. But let's say that they're alphas and betas, And I think it's a false duality, because not every man can be an alpha leader. You can't be a leader without followers, and there are some men that just want to belong and don't want to lead. So I want to make sure to strip those terms of any value judgments. So let's just say that there are strong, confident, dedicated alphas who maybe aren't emotionally integrated, and you have soft, sensitive, accommodating, agreeable betas who don't have an edge to navigate through their lives. And so if you talk to women, and for the women listening to this, you may recognize this, you may bounce back and forth, when you start dating, between I want to date the awesome guy with the leather jacket and the motorcycle,
Right.
but he's a terrible boyfriend.
Like the bad guy, nice guy syndrome as well, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what. And then you'll date a nice guy, and then the nice guy isn't exciting at all, and it's a bounce back and forth until roughly gets to time to have children, and then many women will settle down with a nicer guy, but the marriage will be very unfulfilling because in part because the man is disintegrated. And so the thing is that those are not, and so women naturally draw the conclusion that, well, if this is all men are, then men are shit, right? But the reality is that those are not two different kinds of men. That's one man who's been shattered in half. And how he was brought up determines to some extent which side surfaces. So I'll give myself as an example. My dad worked very, very hard to provide a very nice life for me and my sister and my family, but it meant he wasn't around very much. So I was primarily raised by my mother, who, as much as I love her and I forgive her and I value her very greatly, but she was a narcissist, and she made me into her son husband is the term that gets used right now. A sort of emotional incest is another term. Right. And that weighed very heavy on my heart and spirit and really in my body. And so it made me quite soft and quite sensitive to be accommodating to her needs. And it was a burden that I wasn't really meant to carry. But it did switch me on emotionally. It just made it very difficult for me to navigate through the world of men. So I would be more beta, I guess you would say. But through my own journey as a man and through my own initiation, which we'll get to, I began to discover my edge. And I cultivate that through travel. And so what I seek to do is to help men understand, whichever side of the line that they're on, that there are whole untapped potentialities within you that will help you become the fulfilled man that you want to be. Because there are many men who are very successful in the world, say financially, in their careers, etc., where their home lives with their kids and their wives are just a mess. Right, where the marriage is unhappy because they don't have enough emotional availability. They kill it in the office, or they kill it at whatever it is they happen to do. But when they come home, their wife is unfulfilled, and they're not there for their kids. And these men don't necessarily know what's going on, and they end up in just as bad a place as the man who's very soft without an edge, who just kind of gets led along by life. And the thing is when I encounter in men is that dichotomy, that split, that duality, and help to remedy it in men as I've remedied it in myself. And there were specific steps I took along the way to doing that. The first one was initiation. And, for thousands of years in cultures around the world, this is a repeating pattern. When a boy reached puberty, or when the generation of boys reached puberty, the men of the village would come and take them away from their mothers. And there's a book about this. It's called Iron John by Robert Bly, which I recommend very highly. This is a good introduction to many of these topics for men who are curious, and women as well. So the men of the village would come and take the boys away from the mothers, and the mothers would participate in the drama and be like, "No, don't take my son," but knowing that they're participating. Right. And the boys would be taken into the forest, and they would be put through some sort of trial, some sort of challenge. And because this is life and death was on the line, some of the boys would not survive. Right? You had to survive. And like there's a tribe in, I want to say it's in Africa, and they paint the boys' faces with mud, and the mud dries, and then they circumcise the boys who are 13, and the mud has to not crack, so their face has to remain still as they're being circumcised at age 13. Wow. The mud cracks, then you're not a man, right? So that's we don't have to do that in our modern society anymore, but certainly circumcision is really its own topic, which is a whole. Yes,
I was just going to say this. Ooh.
No, it's a big thing for sure. Yeah. But so we're setting that aside, but that's the level of challenge. Or if you see the movie 300, like in the movie 300, the young Keanu Leonidas is sent into the woods, and he has to hunt like a wolf or something like that. And there's this cool scene where he's in the snow and he has to kill the wolf. And if the boy comes back, congratulations, he's now invested with the responsibility of being a man. He has earned regard in the eyes of the men of the village, and the way that they see him changes, and the way, as a result, he sees himself changes. And he begins to take on the mantle of manhood as the generation of fathers ages into elders, and he becomes a warrior. Okay, so that's an ancient process that has been part of human societies forever. We don't have that process in the West. We don't have it in America. I don't believe that it exists in Europe. We have fraternity hazing, doesn't really count. Yeah. We have military hazing, not really the same thing, can kind of serve a similar function. But other than those two things, it doesn't exist. And what you said at the start about boys driving male bodies is the way that I usually frame it. The reason why that is because the men are uninitiated, because I believe there's a biopsychological switch that lives in the back of our heads that needs to be flipped by an initiation, which is something you have to be able to fail at. Right. And so I was very fortunate in 2013, literally right before you and I met. In fact, I don't think these two things are a coincidence. I was initiated with an organization called the Mankind Project, and that was their whole mission, was to lead weekend initiations around the world. And it's a fantastic process. They'd been doing it for 40 years. And so I found my way into this organization. I went to the New Warrior Training Adventure. I was initiated, and this whole new world came online in my mind. And I was like, there is no doubt in my mind that I'm a man now, and I better start acting like it. And that was the first time when during my own initiation, I got to take all the softness and discover its value in a community of men, and also be challenged by men from the other side to rise to their level, and vice versa. And so for the first time, I got to look into the mirror, as many men did and do, and say, this is what it means to be a man. And so I began knitting those halves of myself together. And that ultimately manifested within a couple of years of liberating myself from all these circumstances that I had gotten myself in. I had trapped myself in this life. And it's like, this is not serving me anymore. And within 2 years, I had found my way into men's groups, into therapy, and just began emptying out my inner self, turning myself inside out and shaking out all the shit, through tears and crying and, all sorts of therapy and stuff like that. And I liberated myself to fulfill my dream of traveling the world. But it began with initiation. Yeah. And so that's a lot of what's missing in men today, is that experience of I've been through a thing where I have to discover some inner resources inside myself to get past, whether that be God or your higher self or however you want to phrase it, and to be able to fail and to have to rely on something higher, and then to be seen in a community of men for having done that. That initiation process is very powerful, and more men desperately need it.
Yeah. That's excellent. I want to talk a bit about this initiation process, because it's so important. Thank you for sharing so much. I can see myself in you, and I'm sure many other men. I can even see myself in your upbringing, very similar. My dad, the company man, a lot of work, traveling. My mom raised me the housewife. I had a quote unquote good childhood, but within it came narcissistic wounding. Similar. My mom then also used me as unconsciously with her stuff. No parents are perfect, all of that. But it also quote unquote retarded my development, because I was also truly, similar to you, like very overly emotional, like a beta male, so to speak. You know what I mean? I didn't even have no success with the ladies and whatnot. Like I didn't even have, I think, my first girlfriend I had at the age of 19 or 20. That's the first time I had, actually sex and whatnot. So I was very insecure within myself, very over emotional, which developed another sensitive side of me. That's absolutely right, but very unbalanced. Yes. And it took me some while, because it ties into the process, I think, to really fuse both them. That's, for lack of better words, both male and beta and alpha male. To become a man, requires a process of individuation. In general, right? That's a process of individuation to become yourself. And I can see how my individuation process was also delayed because of the way I was grown up, you know what I mean? And kind of like missing this initiation. But it's very interesting, because what is missing is a rite of passage. Right, that's really for man in general. You see this in other cultures. And what we have nowadays, as you hinted at, is this pseudo unconscious initiations we engage in, because it's archetypal. We need it. Like you have fraternities, or you have raves, which I went to. You know what I mean? That was almost like similar to you, desert raves in the 90s. Like I'm going out, I'm taking psychedelics. That was my initiation. That happened. Even it was not conscious, but it bring to something deep. I remember that at some point I facilitated my own initiations. I'm taking the Terence McKenna example of 5 grams of shrooms, just close it, in a dark room. But then I had to face my shit with my parents and all of that, and came face to face with who am I, my manhood as a man, my sexuality, everything from this higher perspective. And I was forced to integrate it myself, right? But we are missing role models. You know what I mean? I think that's what I remember I was, came back from, and my dad is very loving, great relationship with him now. But I remember when I first came back from the US, my first travel back to Germany, my early 20s, I sat my dad down with a beer. I'm like, why did you wanted to talk to him about women? You know what I mean? Tell me something about, you know what I mean? So I had to figure all this out myself, even that ties in not understanding women, especially nowadays, how young kids learn about women and sexuality is through porn. online porn, literally. That's a huge issue in itself, which we can dive into as well. But this rite of passage, you're so right on, this is so much missing in this day and age, to have this conscious initiation from boyhood into manhood. Right. And it's happening unconsciously. So we mistake like pottering, trying to get laid out in the bars, whatnot, you know what I mean? The pseudo initiation, they become very distorted. And that's where maybe more the toxic masculine aspect comes in, because it's not a conscious process, so to speak. But what I really like what you said, it's really about what you mentioned before, fusing this more sensitive side, the yin and the yang, right? It ties into the alchemical marriage of the inner male and female, which we've talked about, which Philip Shepard has talked about to a degree as well, right? So to speak. So going back to that, so with this whole, because what you experience in yourself, I think a lot of men, what is not to dismiss, what a lot of men are struggling with, or many of us, is just basic childhood wounding. So whatever you then become in your inner childhood, be it more beta or alpha, is also related to the way you grow up, right? So we need to have a certain compassion, a certain psychological process in the sense of integrating these parts.
Yes.
Right? And that's what you discovered through the Good Man Project?
The Mankind Project.
Mankind Project, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole childhood wounding thing and how all that surfaces. So there are two kinds of healing, and one gets talked a lot about, and it's kind of just part of our culture right now, and the other doesn't really seem to be super well understood at all. The more feminine kind of healing is where we all sit in circle and we share and open up until something traumatic or challenging surfaces, and then we talk through it. And that is a very feminine style of healing, and that is very necessary. That works for people who are good at like talk therapy. Like that worked really good for me because I love to talk. So I'm very verbally actuated, right? So it was very easy for me to sit down in a men's group or for me to sit down in a therapist's office and talk through the things going on inside until what I had going on surfaced. Excuse me, and then to sort of dive into it in more of like a Gestalt kind of process and release it. And I think similar to your experience, like that narcissistic wounding connected me very powerfully to parts of myself. It was my own, like how does the universe work the way that it does? Like, we receive the upbringing we need to give us the skills we need, and then we have to go in and cultivate them in the world, right? So I look at my upbringing as like, wow, like it was really, really tough in so many ways, but it connected me to so many gifts, and I'm so grateful for it, because that gave me a very strong base to stand on within myself to be able to go out and challenge myself in a more masculine form of healing, which I hear referred to as interventionism. And that's where you simply say something really crystal clear with a very sharp sword and very clean. And it can be very difficult to get to this point because you have to know what part of yourself is handling the sword. So if I go up to a friend and I'm like, hey Tom, like you're looking kind of fat, you should sort that out. Right? Mm-hmm. That could be potentially very confronting for Tom. But if I say it, and there's all different ways to go about it, if I say it in the right way, with the right tone, with the knowledge, then I'm very clean in it. I'm not trying to abuse him. I'm trying to crack through his shell to get him to recognize something very important. Yeah. That's a more masculine interventional style of healing. Men need both. Mm-hmm. I very much worked for me to do the sort of more feminine style of healing, talk therapy. But then I needed to go out into the world and be actively challenged by life and other men to step up my game and to be told point blank to my face, like, you're screwing up, we need you to do better. And I manifested that through travel. So whether I was on a sailboat and getting chewed out by the captain for screwing something up, or part of a mountain climbing team in India and like really having to step up my performance for the other guys, through being challenged in that way, that held such a powerful aspect of my healing as well. And what our culture is not very good at, and I actually want to challenge this notion that it's daddy government. I think now we have mommy government. And it's a real thing. I think we have a hiding behind this notion of patriarchy. Patriarchy does not exist. It does not exist, and it never has. It's like so many other narratives. When you scratch beneath the surface a little bit, the whole thing disappears. What's actually going on is we have a hyper feminized society. The gynocentric social order is what Rollo Tomassi says, and this author Rollo Tomassi, whose work I recommend, we'll go into that later. But so that isn't actually good at teaching men and challenge them directly to be better. It's very numbing. It's very safe. Let's all be safe together. We're all in this together. No, don't stick out from the herd. We're all in this together. Don't be different. Don't question. I don't think that's a masculine thing. I think this is not about men and women, but by the way, sorry, something just fell off my desk. This is not about men and women, by the way. Masculine and feminine are two different energies, as I'm sure that you've gone into quite a bit. So I want to make that really, really clear. But I think we have a hyper-feminized society that's very numbing, that doesn't encourage men to step up, that doesn't challenge them. Those of us who have some men are very lucky to have fathers that do challenge them and mothers who do support them emotionally. Right now, we're in a place where it's like, let's just numb and numb and numb. And so some men, I succeeded very much in talk therapy, and then I needed to go out into the world and recognize, like, no, I need men to tell me what's up. So those two sides of healing are very, very important, and they're both very difficult to do well, because one of the dangers of both of them are identical. The dangers of feminine healing is that you can get someone to open up, and then you can wound them very, very deeply if you don't have if you have a rusty sword instead of a scalpel. Right. And there are plenty of examples, I'm sure that you're aware of energy healers or whatever, who get people opened up, and maybe now they're inserting their own ideologies, and it's like, that's extraordinarily dangerous, essentially reprogramming people, which sucks, right? And the other danger of the masculine interventionist style of healing is you can actually brutalize somebody. You can actually abuse them, right? And they shut down, and neither's worse than the other. They're both equally bad, and they both require an equal amount of skill. And what our culture right now, particularly in the healing arts, is not good at, is navigating that boundary between how can one healer do both. That's something that I explore in working with men. I can take them into facilitation processes that I've experienced and led many times to get them to open up. But I can also, through discipline and self-knowledge, through discipline, it's like, no, you set this goal. You are accountable to this goal. What is going on there? And to really challenge them, and to see men's eyes open up. Like, I tell my clients, you are now accountable to me. If you've never been accountable, you are now accountable to me. And some men really respond to that. And then I can couple that with my experience in the healing arts, moving more into facilitation and opening up. And so that's a boundary that that's not a boundary in the right way. It's a line that I go back and forth across. And I think that's what the integrated man of today really needs, is not to be divided from one side of his nature or the other, but to do both. And you need both to succeed in the outer world, to be able to establish boundaries and goals and deliverables and perform in the world of men, and also to be available to your wife and children or your partner. To be able to do all of those things at once, romantically, professionally, is the recipe for fulfillment today. And it's uniquely possible today, like no time in history. And so my own journey has showed me that. And so I'm happy to pass that on to men in the ways that I can.
Beautiful. Yeah. You mentioned some very interesting, profound things. Number one, you're absolutely right. I see it in my profession. I do sessions as well. I work with my wife. We do online courses, and the approach for both, the more quote feminine or masculine approach, is absolutely necessary. I would even say the feminine approach is not just talk therapy, but also somatically going into the body. Let's process, let's go, let's feel, right? Yes. Very much needed. But we also even sometimes go with the flow, just see how it feels. But sometimes we even said in our embodiment of soul awakening course, you also need to discipline. You need to do the practice. We cannot do it for you. You need to have active yang. It's not sitting back and letting things happen, right? And I see this also similar to you when I work with people, because everybody's unique and everybody's different, everybody needs a different approach. And even if you tune into another person, some person you need to engage, address more the yin side, you know what I mean? The feminine, get the emotional up, get through the armor. And sometimes people need a more stronger mirror. Call them out. Very much needed. I need to be called out sometimes, right? And it's absolutely, my wife and we call each other. It's all context. But what is very important, I think you hit the nail on the head. You can damage people either way. So that's why, as a therapist or coach, or when you work with others, you're aware of, you have to be aware of your own shit, right? So you don't project it onto other people. And I see this a lot happening. I can easily check myself when I give a mirror. Is it my own projection, right? Or am I truly helping the other person? So, or the other, like, am I trying to install my own ideology and belief, or am I truly helping other person? Because as you know, when you work with others, what works for one may not work for another. And so oftentimes the advice we give others, we need to first apply ourselves. So that's really like, I think it's very important that I call it in the sense that your level of being determines also your own integration, your own wholeness, how you truly can help others. Hence, you also embody the archetypal journey of the wounded healer, right? Going through the journey yourself, and now the return, so to speak, to help others, right? So that's very important to point out. The other one I wanted to say, I just realized it now. Yeah, it's not about daddy government; it's about mother government, because it's so obvious, especially nowadays with this socialist leftism that's happening. That's toxic feminism, right? And that's a whole other topic we can dive deeper, this whole distortion of left versus right, because on the true political scale, more left simply means more government, which we are experiencing now, more being taken care of my mother government, not taking responsibility anymore, right? So numbing people, as you see. And more right is actually less government. It has been completely distorted with some sorts of racist infusion and whatnot nowadays, but it's more the masculine principle, right? They're more like, okay, I'm going to take care of myself, the self-responsibility. But it's so right that, that what we're experiencing now is a numbing, this leftist it's like toxic feminism. It's just your feelings matters over facts, so to speak. We need to put you in safe space so you don't get offended anymore. And there's no responsibility. It's completely this toxic feminism, leftism shows itself in this complete victimization, right? It's good, like, as long as I'm like some sort of an identity group of some sort of victim, I, have more importance than others, so to speak, right? So that's what we're seeing right now, this kind of pathogen. And I agree with you. Even Philip Schaap would agree. We don't live in there's no such thing as patriarchy. These words are being thrown around without people understanding and completely conditioned, without seeing the depth of it. And right now we need this renaissance of men, because we need men to also step up to the plate, because what is also, I want your take on that, what's called nowadays in the mainstream toxic masculinity, right? Which has been so distorted, obviously, in many ways. And we see even advertisement. I remember the Gillette commercial some time ago with this toxic. What's your take on that? What do you see in official culture around this so-called toxic masculinity that's promoted? Or
there's a lot there, but before we dive into it, there's something that's underneath this discussion before we really get into toxic masculinity and what's going on in culture. There's a deeper dynamic that's going on that'll help inform all of it. One of the things that our culture is really comfortable with right now is criticizing and is pointing to, acknowledging, and criticizing the use of male physical power. Right? That's the toxic masculinity is about that. It's violence, right? Like physical violence. The culture is really rape culture, etc. Yeah. One of the things our culture is absolutely terrible at and pretends does not exist is feminine power. Feminine female power is not in the realm of physical force. Feminine female power is in the realm of shaming. Right? That is the power that women have. And that power is so strong that when you even speak and you say something that women have power to shame, you get shamed. And you can demonstrate in front of you that women have power. And so what we have in our culture now, in this hyper-feminized culture, is not a culture of physical force, right? You don't have jackbooted thugs coming to your house, thankfully, yet, telling you what to do. You have the total media apparatus of television, social media, movies, engaged in the act of shaming. Widespread, large-scale, full-force shaming. That is a female power. That was the power that was invested in women as part of the division of power of the sexes, because women were given a time out of memory, probably, the ability to shame men and harm their souls. Men were, and this is probably, there's a biological component to this, because women control access to reproduction, right? So you're not going to have a baby without a woman. So a woman can shame you as a man and shame your soul, and therefore you're not going to reproduce. Meanwhile, men have physical power over women's bodies, right? So we're really good at saying that men have physical power. We're not good at saying that women have shaming power, because that shaming power is so blown up and so inflated and so all around us, we take it for granted and don't even see it. Like the proverbial fish in the ocean, like, what is water, right? we're swimming in an ocean of shame, and you see it in movies. Just look at the ridiculous dad meme, like The Simpsons and Ray Romano, Everybody Loves Raymond. It's there. It's in Star Wars, and you see the constant shaming of Han Solo as a deadbeat dad. Like Kathleen Kennedy of Lucasfilm said, the fourth is female, right? That was her fame. That was the famous shirt. Luke Skywalker is hiding on a planet drinking alien teat milk. This shaming of male archetypes. You see what I don't know if you saw what they said did to Jean-Luc Picard in the latest Star Trek series, where he gets chewed out by the Admiral of Starfleet says, sheer fucking hubris. The Terminator, the T-800, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character in the latest version of Dark Fate, has returned back in time, successfully kills John Connor, and then becomes a draper. Like he hangs drapes. He's a robot. He hangs drapes, and you can look that clip up on YouTube. Shaming, and now you have Nathan Drake, the modern Indiana Jones archetype from the Uncharted series, is being played by Tom Holland, who played Spider-Man. Like he's kind of and Robert Pattinson is playing Bruce Wayne. This is the continual undermining of male archetypes in the form of shaming that's being conducted by a hyper-feminized society against men, and
it's being normalized.
Hyper-normalized, yes. And so toxic masculinity as a term is a shaming term, is used to shame men out of something very important. And Jordan Peterson made the observation that many women cannot tell the difference between a competent man and a tyrant. Right. So like to women, they can look very similar. A highly competent man who's not a tyrant at all can appear very similar in many women's eyes to a tyrant. And so that shaming, that toxic masculinity is designed to confuse well-meaning men that they don't want to be mistaken for a tyrant. So they avoid competency because they respond to that shaming. And so this is why inner work is so deeply important right now, because only through inner work, and I think also through physical fitness, can we purge our bodies and our histories and our minds of shame. And as soon as we cannot be shamed, we cannot be controlled by the system, but we cannot be controlled by the social order. Toxic masculinity is a term that's used to socially control men, to shame them out of competency, because competent men coming together in groups are a genuine threat to the social order. And so the Renaissance of Men is more than just my personal brand. The Renaissance of Men is a 40-year men's movement, beginning with the mythopoetic movement in the 80s, that's building up men's inner and outer strength, that I think now is culminating in a moment where men can see the social order and can no longer be shamed by it, and are coming together in communities, in groups, to stand up and say, they're not saying overtly, we will no longer be shamed, but they're saying, you know what? We reject your social contract and we're going to build it ourselves. We built the civilization, because the message of woke can't actually create. And we can get into reasons why that is. Woke doesn't create anything. Woke says, we are victims. You built a system on the back of our victimhood. We'll just take your institutions as payment. Thank you. That's what woke essentially says. And so the men are like, okay, you can have the institutions. Let them crumble because you don't know how to run them. We'll build new ones, right? We're living through Atlas Shrugged, essentially. And so the history of the 40-year men's movement, the Renaissance of men, this entire 40-year process, is men arriving in that place to say, we're going to build it ourselves again. We did it once before, we'll do it again, and we will no longer allow ourselves to be shamed by you. And so that's sort of what I'm attempting to surface to men about what's actually going on in our society today.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, thank you. That's so so many people need to hear that. Especially, it's so right. I just read, and actually, I just remember Laura, my wife. She wrote an article about toxic feminism, right? But she released a lot of backlash from women because she pointed out exactly. She pointed out that elephant in the living room, that toxic feminism is based on this shaming. Like there's a lot of toxic feminism is more undercover. It's more like, it's very manipulative. Yes. Like when you look at true toxic masculinity is more overt, right? It's more obvious, it's more violence. But toxic feminism is more covert, right? It's the shaming, it's the guilting, it's a passive aggressiveness, and it's some nastiness behind it, And we see this, for example, with the Me Too movement, which which is essentially turned into full-on just shaming men, not questioning, and you got to believe every woman and whatnot, and right away the shame, accountability. There's no responsibility in handling these situations from a more true compassionate manner, by the way, you know what I mean? Not a compassionate in not taking responsibility, but, this underlying shaming. I can see it even as you were talking about. I was looking at my own relationships because of similar upbringing, my past relationships. I was also shamed in many ways, manipulated. And then I took it on. I'm a bad boy. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a bad boy. Like, I'm sorry. Always being apologetic. I had full on this, the Mr. Nice syndrome going on, always feeling sorry for things I shouldn't feel sorry for at all. And it's like you're really being made, this shaming is so ingrained in our culture. And then as you explained it, it became more and more obvious. It's really, and that's the underlying, you're absolutely right to understand this toxic feminism, what's happening in our official culture in general, and has even exponentially ingrained, normalized nowadays. The shaming is the underlying force behind this distortion of toxic masculinity, because that in itself is shaming, right?
Yes. Toxic masculinity is not an excess of masculinity. It's a lack of masculinity. So it's these boys driving male bodies, right? That don't have the ability to self-regulate the use of their physical power, their testosterone, their energy, which society is used to celebrate and channel productively into productive creative ends. That was what was called toxic masculinity. What we would, unfortunately, those are boys. Those are boys that used to be taken into a community of men, honed, shaped, disciplined, and used that force to build society up. That was and then toxic masculinity became full masculinity as the son was led by the father. We've spent the past 50 or so years more probably in American culture shaming and denigrating and essentially destroying the image of the father. And there's a book called The Boy Crisis by Dr. Warren Farrell, which I recommend, which is a very scientific exploration, socio-scientific. He's a lovely man, exploration of what happens to boys when there are no fathers in the home. And he breaks down all the societal impacts from drug abuse and suicide and dropouts. And, he even traces, the whole school shooter phenomenon to these are fatherless homes. Gang violence is due to fatherless homes, etc. And he breaks it all down. He lays it all out. And so we've spent the past 60 years removing the father from having influence in society. And what happens? Society begins to break. Boys begin to break. They don't have a father to shape them and discipline them to become useful and productive, happy and fulfilled members of society. And so they begin expressing their energy, their natural testosterone, their natural productive energy. Like I was talking to a friend, an author named Alison Armstrong, and she was telling me, she was relating a secondhand story about her friend who who for some medical reason needed to take a testosterone injection. It may have been related to some medical procedure, like she needed an injection of testosterone. And so she took injections of testosterone and she was wired all the time. And she was like, oh my God, is this what it's like to be a man all the time? And the men around her were like, well, yeah, probably. And she's like, I had no idea. It's that women don't fundamentally understand what it is to be in a male body. And many times women look at men and think that they're just broken versions of women and don't recognize. And many men think that too. Many men don't recognize that there is a unique and valuable experience of being male that's positive and good and true, and that is separate from the female experience. And we need to reconcile those experiences. What we have right now is an attempt, again, by this shame culture to shame men into being more like women. Some men, because they're truly, truly good-natured men, will fall into that. Like, okay, you're right. That was me. Like, of course, I wanted to make women happy. I was raised to be a pleaser, right? I didn't want to make mom upset. As long as I make sure I get my grades and do good in school and keep dad happy, as long as I'm making sure I'm not making mom upset. That translated into my relationships, etc. And I was very, very agreeable, which is fundamentally a positive thing. But it became debilitating. It became debilitating over time. And it's because of my well-meaning nature that I did that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And then on the other side, you have guys who don't respond to that at all. And they're like, no, fuck you. Right. And they don't have the ability to connect with that energy, but they would be very, very benefited by it if they could. And so again, this split shows up where you have these sort of weak, passive beta males, which is, I should mention, its own form of toxicity. It's possible to be toxically nice. There's a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy. I've read extremely widely in this field. field. So you're going to hear me rattle off books the whole time.
Good.
No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, another lovely man I've had on my podcast. And it goes into the nice guy syndrome, where nice guys suppress their own authentic desires and feelings, and the act of suppression builds up energy, and then they explode because you can't keep it in forever. So that's how you can be toxically nice. And different men are good at hanging on for different amount of times, but that was also me. I had an explosive temper, unfortunately. I never harmed anyone, but I certainly, I didn't harm myself, but certainly I did damage to my life with my explosive temper, and I seemed like such a nice guy. It's because I was toxically nice. So this image of toxic masculinity, though it expresses itself primarily towards men who don't allow themselves to be shamed, essentially, there's a toxic nice guy side as well. And the whole frame of it itself is part of a larger shaming mechanism of allowing culture to shame men out of their competency. Because just to close the thought, those nice guys are so afraid of being labeled like, I don't want to be toxically masculine, like that politician or that, that person or whatever. So instead, I'm just going to be passive because I don't want to be identified with that. And it's destructive. It's fundamentally destructive to the best in men because the shame force is so powerful over their truly generous and good hearts. And so there's a good bit of rehabilitation to do of men's hearts to get them to stand up for what they believe in. And I think a lot of that comes down to physical fitness as well, which we can get into.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks so much. Wow. I feel we just scrapped the surface.
There's a lot more here.
But we're at the end of the first hour. And in the second hour, I definitely want to dive deeper, also of current events, the work culture, the left, like what's happening. I also want to dive deeper into, some practical solutions for men, like practical what they can do, when they first hear about it, more suggestions of you and the work you do. But just to close it off, where can people or men, anybody really reach you and listen to your podcast?
Yeah, you can find my podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher. It's called The Renaissance of Men. You can find me most active on Instagram right now, and that's Ren of Men, at Ren of Men, RENOFMEN, like Renaissance of Men, but shorter, Ren of Men. I'm also active on Twitter, at Will_Ren of Men. And you can find me on my website, renofmen.com. And all of those sources will be a good way to find my podcast if you don't want to type in The Renaissance of Men. Excellent. So, which is, I had to go through a whole thing with that.
I have the links in the description anyway, and in the notes, show notes. But also, go ahead.
Add one more thing. If you go to renofmen.com/library, you'll see a compilation of all the different books. And this list is growing all the time, so I'm trying to keep up with it. All the different books I recommend leaders to follow, communities to become a part of that are about this larger renaissance, which is hundreds of thousands of men around the world. I'm just trying to document it so that more men know about it.
Excellent, because I'm sure a lot of men were going to ask you about the titles, the books. What was the book again? Was it, what I mean? So for myself, again, even as well. And I also wanted people know, because my audience knows, I'm sure, of David Whitehead. I've been on his podcast. He has been on my podcast. And he recently was on your podcast for an excellent discussion. So definitely check out Will at renofmen.com and, his podcast on, Spotify or iTunes, and I'll link all of that below. And for anybody, again, the second hour is available for members. If you haven't signed up yet, please go to veilofreality.com and sign up to the membership. We'll give you access to all the second hours of this podcast, as well as the membership forum. And we'll be right back with Will Spencer and the Renaissance of Men. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Bernhard.